Tonight on CBC Vancouver News.
It just tells us that we have less room for error.
With the new UK variant of COVID-19 detected in BC, and urging not to let up on health measures, especially for travelers. Also,
most of us can't begin to fathom that someone as young as 14 years old could be shot and murdered.
a teen boy is gunned down getting out of a taxi, one of 2 deadly shootings in Surrey within 24 hours. And
I spent 3 of the most wonderful years of my life in that building.
decades later, nursing grads from Royal Columbian Hospital reminisce as the building faces demolition.
This is CBC Vancouver News.
Good evening and thanks for joining us tonight. There are more people in the hospital with COVID-19 right now than at any other point in BC's pandemic. And while there are reasons for optimism, there are also questions surfacing about the province's pandemic response over the holidays in particular. Let's take you through the numbers first. More than 370 people are in the hospital right now. 80 of them are in intensive care. There are currently more than 7,500 active cases in total across BC. Since Christmas Eve, 74 more people have died. That death toll now nearing 900. BC recorded more than 2,200 new cases over that span as daily tallies continued their overall downward trend, and nearly 12,000 people have been vaccinated to date. But there's more to those numbers than meets the eye. Our Eva Yuguensenj is here to break down what we've heard from provincial health officials today. So, Eva, tell us about the context around those relatively falling new numbers.
Well, the average over that 5-day period was around 440 daily new cases. That's right on track with the slight decline in BC's pandemic curve since late November. But there were also much fewer tests done over the Christmas holiday. And Provincial Health Officer Dr. Bonnie Henry explained why.
We know across the province that people going for testing has been down by as much as 50%. And partly it's people don't want to be tested and have to isolate before this holiday, which is worrisome because we know that people are getting together, some people, and even if it's just your household, that you may bring this into your household and spread it to them.
Dr. Henry also gave more details on a new variant of the COVID-19 virus, which was identified in BC over the weekend. A Vancouver Island resident is in mandatory 14-day quarantine after arriving home from the United Kingdom with the virus. The mutation was discovered when the Centre for Disease Control did genome sequencing on that person's test sample. Henry says other positive tests from people who have come through the UK are now also being sequenced.
Since we've learned about this variant in the UK, we've been focusing it on anybody who has been in that in the UK in the last few weeks that has a positive test. So we're talking about several dozen. So it takes several days for these tests to be done. So it's not the routine diagnostic tests that everybody gets to be tested for COVID-19.
Now, Eva, the province's rollout of the vaccine was also questioned today. How did Dr. Henry respond to that?
So as we know, over 11,000 people in BC have now received their first dose of the Pfizer vaccine. But Henry faced questions over why immunizations were paused on Christmas Day and slowed down the following days. Officials in Ontario have faced similar criticisms. Henry says BC is still aiming to have 30,000 people vaccinated by next week.
I think we have done a lot of immunizations over the last week, and one of the things that we are learning is that this vaccine is fussy, both of them. We're still practicing for receiving the Moderna vaccine, but it's not a simple thing to use the Pfizer vaccine, and so a lot of the time over this weekend was to build up the people, the training, and people to be able to safely do it.
The first doses of the Moderna vaccine have already been targeted for several remote First Nations communities because they are easier to transport.
All right, thank you so much, Eva. That's our Eva Yuguensenj reporting live for us tonight. The largest COVID-19 outbreak in the Fraser Health region has already claimed at least 24 lives. They include a couple who died just 2 weeks apart after being married for more than 6 decades. Our Zara Premji brings us their story.
and Irene Falk's romance dates back more than 62 years.
My grandma and grandpa really had a fantastic love story.
A storybook tale of sorts, meeting at teaching school in Saskatchewan, writing love letters while Irene worked in Africa. But one bite from a mosquito would change their lives forever.
She got bit by a mosquito that had malaria, and it was so bad she actually had to return to Canada. And that's when my grandma and grandpa reconnected and eventually got married.
More than 6 decades of marriage, 3 sons and 4 grandchildren later.
If it weren't for that mosquito, I might not be here, which is a strange thing to think about.
But on November 23rd, in the largest COVID-19 outbreak in the Fraser Health region, Irene Falk lost her life to the virus. And just 2 weeks later, on December 6th, David joined her as one of the at least 24 that died from COVID-19 at Tabor Village Long-Term Care Facility in Abbotsford.
It's really painful. On the other hand, I mean, it sounds strange to say, but I'm glad they were able to go together.
Their family, spread across Canada, the U.S., and France, kept apart because of the pandemic, says the loss is one they haven't come to terms with quite yet, but one they want to use as a reminder for the rest.
The rules are pretty simple. You know, you wash your hands, you keep your distance, you wear a mask. It's not rocket science. And when you don't follow it, there are severe consequences.
Consequences that took both parents before their families were ready to let go.
They're innocent. They're not going out without masks. They're not spending time with large groups of people, but the actions of others have consequences.
And consequences that cost the couple their lives. Zara Premji, CBC News, Vancouver.
Well, changes to the provincial health orders mean young athletes can now resume practice after they were among the initial sports-related bans. The modification now means players between the ages of 18 and 22 can practice again in small groups, but spectators and games are still suspended. The modified order has also changed the term adult team sport to group sport. Instead, it's also limited to 2 people indoors for activities like singles tennis and coached training sessions. However, up to 4 people are allowed to practice together indoors. It's been a tragic 24 hours in Surrey, where 2 teenagers have been killed in separate shootings in the span of 24 hours. Our Isabel Regem joins us now with details. So, Isabel, what can you tell us about last night's case?
A 14-year-old has been identified as the victim of this latest shooting less than a day after a 19-year-old was shot and killed just a few kilometers away. Last night's shooting happened near 148 A Street and 110 Avenue in Surrey's Guildford neighborhood. Investigators say the 14-year-old was pronounced dead at the scene around 7:30 p.m. Police say he was dropped off by a taxi just moments before he was shot. Luckily, the driver was not hurt, and he is cooperating with the investigation. A car on fire was later found the same night, and firefighters were called to put it out in Langley. Now, police are working to determine whether or not the burnt-out car is linked to the killing of the 14-year-old. While police say the shooting was targeted, the outcome could have been far worse.
The shooting placed the public at risk, and the driver of the taxi in particular was at significant risk. It's very fortunate that the driver was not physically injured. However, as you might imagine, this was an extremely traumatic incident for them.
That previous shooting on Sunday happened near 137 A Street and 90 Avenue. That's about a 12-minute drive away from police, from where that previous incident happened. Police have identified the victim in this case as 19-year-old Harman Singh Desi. This too is considered targeted.
All right, so Isabel, are police making a connection at all between these 2 shootings?
Well, the Integrated Homicide Investigation Team says it is something they are looking into, but so far a connection has not been made.
So right now there is no information, no evidence to link those 2. We realize the timing within 24 hours, but you know, it's sometimes those things happen.
Police are asking anyone with dash cam footage from either areas to contact them. No arrests have been made. Tanya?
All right, thanks so much, Isabel. That's Isabel Regem reporting live for us tonight. Well, To the valley, further east into the valley now, and 2 people have died. Another suffering serious injuries following a police chase through Chilliwack. The Upper Fraser Valley RCMP say they received a call around 4 o'clock this morning about a vehicle that was traveling the wrong way down Highway 1 near the settlement of Laidlaw. An officer found the suspect and started the chase. The suspect then crashed into another car, causing a fire. Police tried to put out the flames but couldn't, so they ended up rescuing one person from the car that was struck, but they were not able to save the driver and passenger from the suspect vehicle. They died at the scene. The Independent Investigations Office of BC is now looking into whether officers' actions played a role in their deaths. Well, many oil and gas wells are drilled on leased private land. When a well becomes inactive, the land needs to be restored to its initial state. Our videographer Camille Vernet went to northern BC to better understand the challenges of cleaning up those sites.
Behind me is the first well that was ever drilled on our property. It's in suspension. Nobody wants sour gas anymore. They made us all these promises in the contracts that we signed and that. Well, once they're gone, like, they're not stewards of the land anymore, you know, it's in somebody else's hand. And unfortunately, in this case, it's the taxpayer. And most taxpayers don't realize what's left behind, I guess.
It's important to do because if you don't do that and when any of the tanks were to fail, you could have a spill that then, of course, then you have to clean up further contamination in the soil.
This is agriculturally productive land, and so having it restored back to that is what we want to see these leases return to.
It's probably one of the most competitive markets right now in British Columbia for oil and gas. You're seeing more and more abandonment companies exist every day. Actually, I never really saw myself as an abandonment guy, but it's a good job, it's a rewarding job. You feel good about putting stuff back to bed the way that it's supposed to be.
I don't expect that even once these well sites are reclaimed that I will ever see a normal crop off of that property in the rest of my farming career.
To other news now, and a massive 1,300 kilogram jade boulder that was swiped from a gift shop in BC's interior has been found, and 2 suspects have been identified as potential thieves. It was stolen from outside Caribou Jade and Gift Shop earlier this month. Surveillance footage captured a pickup truck hauling the boulder away with an excavator in tow. The boulder was eventually abandoned and spotted by a passerby who'd heard about the whole story. The store owner says it's a little scratched, but in otherwise good condition, and she's thrilled just to have it back in one piece. And a piece of history in New Westminster is about to meet the wrecking ball. It's been more than 40 years since the Royal Columbian Hospital School of Nursing closed. And what once served as a student residence is now being replaced with a state-of-the-art medical facility. As Belle Puri with CBC Vancouver's Impact Team reports, graduates from the final RCH nursing class are now sharing memories before the building is demolished.
Wow! I got to get some pictures of this.
Each bite of the wrecker generates a memory of the nursing school that used to be here.
The nursing arts lab is where we learned to make beds. Yeah.
That was more than 4 decades ago when the now retired nurses were in training. In 1978, the two were in the final class of graduates from the Royal Columbian Hospital School of Nursing and the last to room in the nurses' residence.
It was really pretty skookum for at the time. We had a built-in wardrobe, we had a sink, we had a desk, and it was quite nice. This was the student nurses' lounge. We had couches here. We had a little dining table and a little sort of kitchenette.
It was a different time.
When we graduated, I don't even think you could wear pants. Could you wear pants?
The order of the day was white dress, nylons, and shoes, and the oh-so-challenging cap.
I used to put a sponge roller in the top of my head, and then there's a little comb inside here, and then it would just go on like this, and then it would stay in place from the roller. And so then at the end of the day, I would always have a curl.
In residence, there were rules.
Men were not allowed up into the building. They could come in, be greeted by house mothers at the desk, they would ask who they wanted to see.
For the most part, nursing was a woman's world. In 77 years of existence, the RCH school graduated only 2 male nurses.
One was maybe the 50s and one was the 60s.
The old school will now be replaced with a new $1.3 billion critical care redevelopment of RCH.
We're going to have a 50% increase in our bed base from 476 to in the mid-600s, which is a huge deal for the hospital.
The work is scheduled to be completed in phases between 2024 and 2026.
This is the 1950 building where we did most of our training, as well as the modular units. And then this is the nurses' residence.
Former students had hoped for a goodbye party in the old residence, but COVID-19 thwarted that plan.
Not to be able to have that goodbye party, that's sad, it is. But time goes on and, things change.
But memories stay the same.
I spent 3 of the most wonderful years of my life in that building. And so when it goes, it'll be like losing a few of those memories, but I still have them in my heart.
Belle Puri, CBC News, New Westminster.
And let's bring in meteorologist Nick Czernkovich now with a look at the forecast. And Nick, I understand we have a weather warning in place, and in the South Coast this time of year could be rain, wind, snow. What have you got for us?
How about all of it?
Okay.
Does that work for you, Tanya?
Sure.
Yeah, we've got another potent system that's making its way onto the coast right now, in fact, and that's what it looks like on the satellite and radar imagery. You're not seeing the rain out here because the radar doesn't extend that far. But if we zoom in a little bit closer, we're already seeing rainfall and snowfall in the higher elevations. Now, Environment Canada has issued a number of warnings with this, so I'll go through them. We've got wind warnings to the north. We've got gale warnings here in the areas in pink, and that's with winds that'll gust about 60 kilometers per hour. Rainfall warnings on the west coast of Vancouver Island up to about 100 millimeters, and then right around the Metro Vancouver area, we've got rainfall warnings for about 50 millimeters, but higher elevations, up to about 200 meters, could see some snowfall. And this is what the forecast looks like. As we head through tonight, you've got showers, but look at this. Just as we dip through the overnight period, as the rain begins to fall, the freezing level is going to drop down a little bit. So I wouldn't be surprised to see some areas like, say, Burnaby Mountain picking up a few centimeters of snowfall before this system is done. As it pushes off, however, we switch back to rainfall and periods of heavy rainfall throughout the day tomorrow. So all told, likely looking at 50, 60 millimeters of rainfall. There's a breakdown of the forecast as we head through tonight. And guess what? There is more rainfall on the way as we head toward New Year's. I'll have your full forecast coming up in a bit.
All right, we'll look forward to that. Thanks so much, Nick. And a reminder, you can watch this newscast all the time live on CBC Gem, and the free app is also where you can find other CBC programs. And CBC Vancouver is also on Facebook, YouTube, and Instagram. More than 24 migrant farm workers from Trinidad and Tobago are finally heading home after being stranded in Canada for months. We'll explain why and catch up with some of them as they depart. That's after the break. And thanks for staying with us during our commercial-free live stream. Well, books can introduce people to a world of possibilities, and for one 11-year-old, they've also inspired a mission. She's working to make sure books with characters who are Black, Indigenous, and people of color are getting the attention they deserve. Magda Gabriela-Selassie has that story.
Flipping through one of her many favorite books, it's hard to tell that Ainara Marinalene wasn't always a fan of reading.
Whenever my dad would get me to read a book, I'd be like, no, thank you. Let me go watch TV instead.
That changed, especially when her dad introduced her to the Percy Jackson books, with their mix of fantasy, adventure, and Greek mythology. But while searching for more books to read, Ainara started to feel left out.
Even in Percy Jackson, there's not a lot of main characters that have diversity.
So she started looking for books with diverse characters, and it soon turned into Ainara's bookshelf on Instagram. Each recommendation, a book with characters who are Black, Indigenous, or people of color.
All these books, they're just normal kids who happen to be of color, being a doctor or dreaming about being a superstar, or just, one of those books about kids trying to solve mystery, So it's just like any book, but it's representation, and it's actually people that look like you.
She reviews the books and interviews the authors and illustrators. Helping Ainara on her quest is her father.
I'm extremely proud of her for identifying a problem and trying to fix it or contribute to fixing it.
And she's about to do even more.
I've got your name badge here. Yes, thank you.
Ainara is now Hamilton Public Library's first junior librarian in residence. BIPOC authors currently make up about 20% of the library's collection. The plan is to have this 11-year-old help increase that.
She's getting some preview reads that we haven't even had access to, so we're looking forward to those titles being published and obviously being highlighted.
And now, like the characters she loves, she's armed and ready for her new mission in the new year. Magda Gabriela-Selassie, CBC News, Hamilton.
And we'll be back in a few moments with more COVID-19 news from right across the country and around the world. Stay with us. Welcome back. Let's take you across the pond now. And the United Kingdom has hit a new pandemic peak. It recorded its highest daily case total ever, more than 53,000. And that means the pressure on hospitals is also increasing. As our Farah Morelli tells us, some health experts are warning of impending catastrophe if stricter measures aren't introduced.
Overworked and overwhelmed, a common sentiment inside UK hospitals.
I was on Christmas Day and it was wall-to-wall COVID. So we see patients who are coming in who have COVID symptoms, but we also see other patients coming in with other problems who turn out to be COVID positive.
People are just beginning to be exhausted. It's been such a long year.
Today, a record-breaking 53,000 new COVID cases were confirmed, and the number of people hospitalized now higher than during the peak of the first wave. Outside one hospital, there were so many ambulances lined up, some were forced to park illegally.
We will continue to do all that we can to keep everyone safe and make sure that everyone is cared for. But I do think that if we continue with the current rate of admissions, we are very, very close to becoming overwhelmed.
Today, while visiting a vaccination centre, the head of the UK's National Health Service acknowledged the toll it's taking on staff.
A lot of people are understandably feeling anxious, frustrated and tired. And now, of course, again,
we're back in the eye of the storm with this second wave of coronavirus.
That storm, a surge in positivity rates. A recently released figure showed there were more than 645,000 cases of COVID in England. That equates to 1 in 85 people with the infection. Today, a warning that things could get catastrophic if nothing changes.
If we don't introduce tougher restrictions in areas in the north and areas that are not currently in Tier 4, they will rise to very high levels of disease and hospitalizations.
Around 24 million people here in England are already living in Tier 4, the highest level of restrictions. The government now has to decide whether that is enough. The health secretary is set to address this tomorrow in the House of Commons. Farah Morali, CBC News, London.
More than 24 migrant farm workers from Trinidad and Tobago are finally able to fly home today. They've been stranded in Canada for months after their government imposed strict entry requirements to try to stem the spread of COVID-19. Our CBC News camera caught up with some of them before they departed from Toronto.
It's like, the feeling is so nice. I just can't wait to see them. Yeah, I miss them a lot.
When 2-3 weeks turned into months, that's when everybody started to get worried. Because, like for instance, this is the first year that I missed 2 of my son's birthday since they're born. It's the first year I actually missed Christmas home in my house. So that was the scary part for me.
Hundreds of seasonal workers had planned to return home in October or November, only to have their flights canceled because of pandemic restrictions back home. You see, the Trinidad and Tobago government requires all citizens who enter the country to quarantine in a government-run facility, and that space is limited. So to manage the influx, they're also chartering return flights now about every 10 days or so. Some workers instead have opted to stay in Canada and continue working for now. The first shipments of the Moderna vaccine have now reached the Northwest Territories and Yukon. 7,200 doses arrived in Yellowknife yesterday, and the same number of doses that same day also reached Yukon. The health minister there called vaccine arrival a turning point in the fight against COVID-19. Nunavut is expected to get its first 6,000 doses soon. Like Pfizer-BioNTech, Moderna is a 2-dose vaccine, but this one can be stored more easily. The 3 territories expect to get enough doses to vaccinate 75% of their adult population by March. The pandemic has created some unexpected challenges, making us rethink how to interact and function in groups. And for educators, it has meant seeking innovative ways to teach from a distance. As Deanna Sumanak-Johnson reports, some are bridging that gap now in a creative new way.
When schools suddenly went online in the spring, 3rd grade French immersion teacher Steve Massa knew he had to keep his students engaged somehow.
I grabbed my iPhone and I had no idea what I was doing, and I just started filming, and I filmed my first video.
As the months went by, Massa's energetic YouTube videos grew in complexity and in popularity.
Bonjour tout le monde, c'est Monsieur Steve.
In his videos, he takes his students on field trips, talks about holidays, all in French. Videos he kept making even after he returned to class.
And I know there's a lot of teachers out there who, aren't as comfortable with technology, and that's cool, and that's totally fine. But it's possible. If I could do it, anyone can do it.
Post-secondary educators face their own challenges when classes went online. Chief among them, teaching practical, hands-on knowledge that normally requires labs or students working directly with people. At Bow Valley College, a new virtual reality lab is helping nurses in training get a sense of what it's like to be one-on-one with a patient.
There's nothing like seeing your patient bent over their bedside table trying to take a breath and struggling for breath. And with the toggles, they can actually feel, and then they see and they hear what that patient is experiencing.
At Dalhousie University in Halifax, this professor created a course loosely based on the board game Pandemic. Students worked in real time, racing against the clock.
We had 4 teams. There were researchers, there were scientists, there were medics, and there were quarantine experts. When one of their moves were executed, the clock was ticking, and they'd have 72 to 48 hours to execute their next move before the next team could go.
In case you're wondering, the students doing the simulation took on the pandemic and won, just as these educators did by keeping learning exciting during tough times. Deanna Sumanak-Johnson, CBC News, Toronto.
American Airlines put a Boeing 737 MAX back in the skies, the U.S. skies, today for its first commercial passenger flight. The planes were grounded after 2 deadly crashes within 5 months the past year. And as Katie Simpson tells us, not everyone is convinced they're safe now either.
Much of this journey is a carefully choreographed exercise in rebuilding trust. Happy crew members boasting about safety on a flight where journalists and bloggers were invited to capture it all.
I have the utmost confidence in the safety of this aircraft. As a matter of fact, my wife is on board.
Boeing's 737 MAX planes were grounded following 2 deadly crashes, which led to scathing revelations about the company's decisions and industry safety practices. After a redesign, new software, and training, regulators deemed these planes safe.
I would fly in it again. I probably wouldn't really bat an eye towards it. It was probably the best way to do it, not knowing and getting it over with than knowing and being fearful of it.
346 people were killed in separate but similar crashes. The first off Indonesia in October of 2018. The plane's software malfunctioned, forcing the aircraft into the ground. It happened again 5 months later in Ethiopia, a crash that killed everyone on board, including 18 Canadians. Chris Moore's daughter, Danielle, was on that flight.
She was always happy, hopeful. She had a beautiful sense of humor.
Moore does not trust Boeing or the U.S. agency that deemed the planes safe. He cites investigations by American lawmakers that found Boeing not only failed in its design of the plane, but embraced a culture of concealment, while the Federal Aviation Administration also failed to do its job.
It's not right. It's not fair for the flying public, too, because safety is paramount, and I don't think they take safety responsibly.
The Boeing 737 MAX remains grounded in Canada, though Ottawa is expected to follow Washington's lead and give Boeing the green light in the new year. Katie Simpson, CBC News, Washington.
Well, COVID fatigue, a deadly explosion in Lebanon, and a whole lot of wildfire smoke. We'll look back on the news stories that defined the summer of 2020 as part of our year in review. Stay with us.
People end up in rooming houses because it's the housing of last resort, short of the missions. That's one part of the rental housing picture in this country, and it's not a pretty one. There's a real lack of decent, affordable places to rent, and it's caught many Canadians, the poor and the not so poor. Our social affairs correspondent Karen Webb reports from Vancouver, a city where there are no rent controls, no easy answers, and a lot of militant tenants.
The pot has been simmering for a while, but it is starting to boil over. The week before Christmas, 100 Vancouver tenants stormed City Hall.
We have been patsies too long.
Middle-class renters have seen many older, affordable blocks torn down, or watched the rents in the apartments they've lived in for years go up 50–60%. There are no rent controls in BC. Even the poorest of the poor have been hit. This residential hotel in Vancouver's downtown east side has doubled some weekly rents.
Columbia Hotel is a perfect example. It's an absolute rat hole. The city has condemned it, and yet they believe that because people are being evicted in the West End, that those people will come here and pay twice what the people down here can afford. Our people are going to be on the street. We're sick of it, and we're not taking any more from anybody.
The problem for many is no place to go. Diana Vandale's landlord evicted her. He said he wanted this house for his own use. 2 months of searching for anything she could afford that would take her children made her desperate enough to stand up in front of a tenants meeting.
While other children are thinking and dreaming about Christmas and Santa Claus, my children are worrying about being together and having a home for Christmas.
Public sympathy helped her, but she says, what about the others?
And I know there's others out there because I've asked people and they just say, I don't know. I don't know. But if they don't know and I don't know and you don't know, who knows? Somebody's got to have the answer to what we're going to do.
David Holchansky of the University of British Columbia says the situation shows market failure.
The market rent control, the natural form of rent control is if a landlord is asking too much for a unit, the people go to another unit and rent. but we're in a situation where there's no place else to go.
Developers aren't building rental housing. There's no money in it. Instead, they're renovating some blocks, demolishing others to build condominiums. Various governments have tried different solutions. North Vancouver put a year's moratorium on the demolition of all rental housing to give local government time to assess the problem. Many Vancouver tenants want rent controls, but developers say neither solution is a good idea.
They've never solved the housing shortage, and I guess they never will, because it discourages people from developing.
Here are some of the stories we're following tonight on CBC Vancouver News.
There's a couple of reasons I believe the numbers are down. Partly it's people have not been going for testing as much, and partly it's people don't want to be tested and have to isolate before this holiday, which is worrisome.
Well, BC's COVID case count leveled off a bit over Christmas, but testing is down significantly. That means there's concern the numbers may provide a false sense of security, with testing down as much as 50% over the past week. It's prompting concerns from the provincial health officer that people aren't going for tests when they should be.
The shooting placed the public at risk, and the driver of the taxi in particular was at significant risk. This was an extremely traumatic incident for them.
The Lower Mainland's latest homicide victim was just 14 years old. The boy had been getting out of a cab when he was shot dead last night. It's believed it was a targeted hit and one of two shootings within just 24 hours in Surrey. A 19-year-old man was also gunned down Sunday night. At this point, there's no evidence to connect the two cases.
Men were not allowed up into the building. They could come in, be greeted by house mothers at the desk, and they would say you had a male visitor, and you would go downstairs to visit with them.
And reminiscing on life in nursing residence in the 70s, the last grad class of Royal Columbian Hospital's nursing school share memories ahead of demolition day. That building that housed many students over the years is about to meet a wrecking ball to make way for a state-of-the-art medical facility. Well, over the past few days, we've been looking back at some of the news stories that shaped this past year. And now it's time to recall the 3 months that brought us COVID fatigue, a deadly explosion in Lebanon, and a whole lot of wildfire smoke. Martina Lovegreen shows us the stories that defined the summer of 2020.
It's been 6 months since the virus made its way to BC. And after weeks of seeing the number of active cases go down, they would triple in the first 2 weeks of July.
The surge in cases over the weekend comes alongside the potential for, quote, explosive growth in COVID-19 cases.
Pandemic fatigue was kicking in, and health officials said young people and private parties were the source of the spread.
A large sunset gathering, complete with dancing and drums, baffled some passing by last night.
Holy crap.
And it infuriated plenty of others.
New restrictions from bars, nightclubs, and restaurants, along with vacation rentals, came into effect. BC gangster Jamie Bacon would reach a plea deal for his role in the so-called Surrey 6 killings, the deadliest gang shooting in the province's history.
The leader of the Red Scorpion gang, Jamie Bacon, pleaded guilty to 1 count of conspiracy to commit murder and 1 count of counseling someone to commit murder. He had originally been charged with first-degree murder, which will be stayed at sentencing. According to various court proceedings, 3 members of the gang arrived at Lal's apartment, killing 4 people, as well as 55-year-old gas fitter Ed Schellenberg, who was fixing the furnace, and 22-year-old Christopher Mohan. The killers dragged Mohan inside the apartment. He had returned home from playing basketball.
In the months ahead, he would be sentenced to 18 years in prison, but with time served in pretrial custody, he had 5 years and 7 months left behind bars.
I cannot justify my my son's innocent death with the sentence that was handed out today.
The blast in Beirut reverberated through the community here in BC.
We've been going through tragedy after tragedy for the last 30, 40 years.
A large amount of ammonium nitrate stored without proper safety measures exploded, killing over 200 people and injuring 6,500 others. BC ramped up testing.
It doesn't open till 12.
Even before the testing center opened, cars trying to be among the first in line.
Yeah, you can't stop though, you gotta keep moving.
And when it opened, it didn't take long. People were told to come back later.
Bring us back at 1:30.
Wearing a mask on transit became mandatory, and anyone throwing a large party could be and would be fined.
If you're ignorant enough and stupid enough to encourage people to attend an event and not to follow provincial health officer orders, then you're setting yourself up for a fine.
The province hired hundreds of contact tracers as August saw the highest number of cases since the start of the pandemic, and it was getting harder and harder to trace its spread. The wildfire season in BC was relatively tame compared to years past. Fire roared through tinder-dry hillsides in the Okanagan.
There's embers all over the driveway, in the pool, on sidewalks, but just sheer stroke of luck that they haven't ignited the grasslands around us.
But thanks to a change in wind direction, the fire didn't move into the city as feared. Remember these annoying things? Yeah, that was September, when parents had to make the tough decision of whether to send their kids back to school or keep them home.
If there was absolutely no school and if I could just keep my kids home, I think that would have been the best option, just staying in our little bubble.
You can always step back.
And despite months of praise,
BC's provincial health officer, Dr. Bonnie Henry, says she's had to have security in her own home, part of the darker side of leading the province's pandemic response.
Nasty notes, to leave phone calls, to harass my office staff. I've had to have security in my house. I've had death threats. I sense that people find that it's okay to do that for a woman who's up front, more so than some of our male leaders.
At my front porch.
Entire towns in Oregon have been almost completely decimated, but exactly how much and who has been lost is still unknown. Meanwhile, Washington state is battling fires of its own, and California has seen an unprecedented level of destruction, more than 12,500 square kilometers burned, and there are too desperate people searching for loved ones.
Smoke from the deadly U.S. wildfires choked Vancouver skies, prompting air quality warnings.
Fire smoke, as with most smoke, is going to have an effect on the immune system. And of course, with an infectious disease like COVID, having a weakened immune system is not a good thing.
And the iconic New Westminster Pier was destroyed. And the Squamish gondola cable was cut in the middle of the night for the second year in a row.
First time, it was unique in the world. The second time, we're targeted.
No one was ever charged after the first time the cable was cut. Now that it's happened again, the owners of the Sea to Sky gondola are offering a reward.
Stick to your safe six, we were told, as a snap election was called in BC.
A good luck charm in his hand, John Horgan is ready to hit the campaign trail.
My lucky stick.
For the first time in history, BC voters will go to the polls during a provincial state of emergency.
Well, coming up, a chess prodigy from the Maritimes is drawing all kinds of comparisons to the Queen's Gambit, and he's just 7 years old. We'll introduce you to the young phenom after the break. And at 6:42, you're looking at a live shot of the Port of Vancouver. We'll find out what kind of forecast we have in store coming up after the break. Stay with us.
The Market Report is brought to you by Fortis BC. We've got even bigger rebates.
Rebate.
Whoa! On select high-efficiency equipment for business, but only for a limited time.
Back to international news now, and a strong earthquake has killed nearly a dozen people and caused widespread damage in central Croatia. Among the hardest hit was the town of Petrinja, where a 12-year-old girl was killed. Emergency teams were using rescue dogs to look for survivors in the rubble. Damage and injuries were also reported as far away as 50 kilometers away in the capital of Zagreb. The country's military was deployed to help with rescue operations. The 6.4 quake even rocked neighboring Slovenia's parliament, prompting an evacuation of the government building there. And let's bring back our meteorologist, Nick Czernkovich. And Nick, we do have those weather warnings in place. How long do we expect them to last?
Well, these particular ones, Tanya, we're looking at probably about 24 to 36 hours. But then beyond that, we may see more propping up as we head into the weekend as another round of rainfall comes in. So I'm going to get to that in just a sec. Let's go over the warnings once more. As I mentioned earlier on, we've got gale warnings out across the coast there, wind warnings to the north, rainfall warnings on the west coast of Vancouver Island, and then rainfall warnings also in the Metro Vancouver area. But there is a note for snow and the sort of the freezing level to be at about the 200-meter mark, which means some of the higher elevations, and not that high, like say Burnaby Mountain, might actually pick up some snowfall through tonight. It's all part of this system as it's sweeping moisture in from the south. It's going to last, this particular one, for about the next 36 hours or so. So here's a look at the forecast board as we move through tonight into tomorrow. Again, watch for that snowfall to move into some of the higher elevations. That's going to dissipate though as we head through tomorrow and the freezing level begins to elevate again. Rainfall pushing through, so this takes us to Wednesday morning. We'll see a little bit of a break through the afternoon to turn to showers, and then more in the way of rainfall as we move through Wednesday night into Thursday. Break on Thursday, and then as we move through Friday, we've got another round of rainfall moving through with yet another system that's approaching the coast. So, as we said earlier, 50 plus millimeters. By tomorrow evening, about 50 millimeters or so, and then as you move through Thursday morning, could be another 10 to 20 millimeters on top of what we've seen through tomorrow. Winds will be a little bit of a factor as well, especially along exposed areas across the shorelines there. Could be gusting at about 60 kilometers per hour. Otherwise, generally about 20 to 40 kilometers per hour. Temperatures today around about the seasonal mark. That's where we're sitting right now. As we move through tomorrow, there's a look at our forecast across the region. Again, very windy conditions out on the coast. Picking up some decent snowfall, though, in some of the higher elevations once we move through the BC interior. Lower mainland temperatures close to seasonal there. And watch again through the overnight period. Places like Squamish, just as you get a little bit higher in the elevation, could pick up 5, even 10 centimeters of snowfall. There's our forecast for the next 5 days. Temperatures above seasonal as we head through New Year's Eve and New Year's Day, but more in the way of rainfall as we get through New Year's Day.
All right, well, wet, but at least it's still kind of warm. Thanks so much, Nick. We'll talk to you tomorrow. Well, Maritimers have a chess prodigy to call their own. At just 7 years old, Andreas Domer of St. John, New Brunswick, has competed against and tied with an international chess master and also won countless titles. And for this young phenom, the Queen's Gambit is simply child's play. Take a look.
The scotch. I like this a lot. I think there's one 9-year-old who used to go, but I was by 3 or 4 years the youngest. Only one other person in my whole class was just another girl. And I once played her in the district, and I won the district.
You won the district?
3 people. There was COVID, so I skipped the provincials and went right to the nationals. And everyone who won the district did, and then out of, I'd say, 5 or 6 people, I think I won the nationals. To become first in the world, it's every year they have a tournament, and I think anyone can compete in it. It's mostly grandmaster stuff. And then the person who, and then people get paired. It's like a Swiss, and at the end, the one with the most points, and then the one who wins the tournament comes top first in the world.
How would you explain to somebody what's fun about it?
Oh, what's fun about it? Well, chess is a brain sport. When you play chess, it's only your head. Well,
Still ahead, the athletes of the year are announced, and both the men's and women's winners have BC connections. We'll tell you who they are, who took the titles. That's coming up next.
A steady stream of customers coming through the doors at Fairplay Pet Supply. Nearly 102 years in operation. The COVID-19 pandemic has thrown out a curveball of uncertainty, but owner Christine Nurse says it's nothing the store can't handle.
The store's seen some tough times. It went through the Depression.
It first opened its doors in its original location of 10th Street Northwest in 1919. The store changed owners 4 times before Nurse's aunt and uncle bought it in 1962. Her father bought it from them 10 years later. Nurse remembers working there as a child.
You know, my brother and I, that we were in charge of sweeping up the dustbin, and then the wooden floor always looked so nice.
Her fondest memories, though, are of the relationships built with customers and staff, a tradition that has lent itself to the store's success. That and some humility.
I don't typically give myself a pat on the back. That's not my nature, and it wasn't my father's nature, and it wasn't my uncle's nature. It's just how I've been brought up. But I'm proud of what I've accomplished.
Terry Trembath, CBC News, Calgary.
When Megan and Michael Wadrago welcomed their second child in the fall, they had both been working from home and feeling a little cramped. They didn't see any options to expand until one day Michael looked outside at the balcony.
It's not something that ever crossed my mind. It essentially had become wasted space. I was considering using it as a storage spot so we could free up more interior space. And when he came up with this idea, I'm like, this is brilliant.
Using tension rods and a tarp, Michael enclosed the balcony to protect it from wind and snow. He's a personal trainer, so he knew what he needed to make it into a gym, as well as a place their little girl Naomi could play, and a retreat where Megan could work out or just take some precious alone time.
It's opened up our world, having an extra room for our 4-person family.
Across the city, Leslie Anderson was also struggling. COVID-19 forced the immigration and refugee lawyer to do her legal aid clinic work in her semi-detached house, where her young children were also doing their schooling online.
And trying to manage art class and drafting factums and everything all in the same space in the same time.
Then Anderson started looking at the old dilapidated shed in her backyard in a new light. She and her fiance, a construction worker, realized it couldn't be saved, so he tore it down and started building something new.
I'm just so moved by the amount of time he's put into this.
The mental health impact, she says, is priceless.
To be able to have a space that I can just close the door at the end of the day and walk away and have that psychological separation from work to home, where I get to take off the lawyer hat and put the mom hat back on and the partner hat back on.
Interior designer Kate Zeidler says both home gyms and home offices have been a huge trend during the pandemic.
Everybody is finding that they have multifunctions for their spaces.
And people are looking at their homes differently now that they're spending so much time there.
Feathering their nests and making their homes more suitable to how they felt comfortable living.
Welcome back. Saskatchewan's biggest football stadium now gets to call itself Saskatchewan's biggest skating rink, too. More than 350,000 gallons of water have flooded the home of the Saskatchewan Roughriders. Yes, on purpose. People in Regina are calling the refashioned stadium Iceville. Starting New Year's Eve, members of the public will get a chance to skate on the giant rink for free. Families can sign up online for 45-minute time slots on the ice. Due to COVID-19 safety protocols, only 30 people will be able to skate in the stadium at a time.
It is a viewpoint that very few people, actually, if you think about the size of our province, very few people get. So for the citizens of Regina and for kids, young and old, to be able to come out here and see the stadium from this perspective and to skate, because we're from Regina, it's wintertime. Who doesn't love to skate?
Work on the 10,000 square meter rink began at the start of December. Even though skating is free, families are encouraged to bring donations of non-perishable food items as a way to pay it forward. The rink will be in operation this way until the end of February. The Canadian Press has named soccer and former Vancouver Whitecaps star Alphonso Davies as its Male Athlete of the Year. The 20-year-old helped his new team, Bayern Munich, capture the Champions League title, making him the first Canadian man to ever win that accolade. Earlier this year, Davies was named the German League Rookie of the Year.
Christine Sinclair! She just broke the record! 185 career goals, Christine Sinclair!
And more accolades as well for Christine Sinclair. Yesterday, she was awarded the Bobby Rosenfeld Award as the Canadian Press Female Athlete of the Year for 2020. Sinclair set a new record for international goals that was previously held by American Abby Wambach with 184, en route to helping the Canadian women book their ticket to the Tokyo Olympics. Sinclair received 20 of 66 votes cast by sports editors, writers, and broadcasters across the country. It's her second time winning the award, and she's the only soccer player to have ever won it. Congratulations to them. You can always find our show online at cbc.ca/BC. Our next local newscast is right here at 11 o'clock tonight with Isabel Regem after the National. Thanks for watching. Have a great night.